Good morning. If you would please come on in and find your seat. We had a wonderful day yesterday, didn't we, with the caregiving workshops? We did. I do see a few new faces in the audience today, and so I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Leisa Easom, the Executive Director of the Rosalynn Carter Institute, and again, I welcome you to Georgia Southwestern State University and the Rosalynn Carter Institute here. The day yesterday was wonderful, but today has an agenda filled with superb speakers. At this time, I'd like to welcome another First Lady. Former First Lady Rosalynn Carter has worked for more than 3 decades to improve the quality of life of people around the world. Today, she is an advocate for mental health, early childhood immunization, human rights, and conflict resolution through her work at the Carter Center in Atlanta. She is the nation's foremost champion for both professional and non-professional caregivers, family caregivers, through her work at the Rosalynn Carter Institute here at Georgia Southwestern State University. She leads the Institute's efforts to build support for all caregivers by promoting mental health and well-being, disseminating evidence-based programs, building public awareness, and establishing best practices. In 1991, Mrs. Carter launched, with Mrs. Betty Bumper's Every Child by Two, which was a nationwide campaign to publicize the need for early childhood immunizations. She has worked with Habitat for Humanity as a volunteer to build homes for the needy. Mrs. Carter has received many honors, among them the Presidential Medal of Freedom, America's highest civilian honor. In 2001, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. She has written 5 books, including her autobiography and her latest book, Helping Yourself Help Others, a book for caregivers. She enjoys fly fishing and bird watching in her free time. Her full bio is located in your packet. So please join me in welcoming Mrs. Rosalynn Carter.
Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to Americus, Georgia, home of Georgia Southwestern State University, my alma mater. We're very pleased to have you here. And I appreciate that message from Michelle. When Michelle and Jill finally put out a message about what they were going to do for veterans, I read it and sent her a message and said, "You left something out. You didn't include caregivers," and that's so important because we'd already been working with the Georgia National Guard and had seen so many people that needed help. So I was really pleased that she took that on, and she's been really wonderful working with military wives and invited us to the White House a couple of times. So just pleased that she's interested in what we're all doing. And the Dole fellas are here. We heard some wonderful stories, difficult stories, from the Dole fellas. Dole fellas? That's what we call you. Okay. Yesterday they told us about their experiences, and it was very moving. We had one who had divorced her husband, and about 4 years later, I think, she remarried. And then her first husband came back with traumatic brain injury and PTSD, just in really bad shape. And they called her, and she told them that she was divorced. And they said, well, they had no other address for him. So she has now been looking after her first husband at home with her second husband and 3 children, and she's here. Seriously. Where is she? I get it. Here she is. It's really hard to believe what they all have been through. And it was just, I was so pleased that I was able to be here for that event. Well, now for nearly 30 years, the Rosalynn Carter Institute has been advocating for caregivers, as Leisa said, both professional and informal. And this morning, I'm just supposed to set the scene about what we're going to be doing today, about the issues we're going to be talking about. And you may have heard some of this, I already know it, but here goes. In the United States alone, over 65 million family members care for loved ones who cannot care for themselves as a result of physical or mental disabilities. And the number is only going to rise because we're getting older and having more problems as we age. And then the military is going to be coming back. And so the burden is going to be much care for a lot of people. Caregivers are America's unsung heroes. They provide up to 90% of the long-term care provided in homes, and they are largely behind the scene, and their contributions are rarely acknowledged. And I think we've all learned that as we have met the caregivers in our community and those that I saw yesterday. While we do know that caring for a loved one can be rewarding, research studies have repeatedly shown that family caregivers have an increased risk of experiencing depression, grief, fatigue, and physical health problems. Secondary, it says, to exhaustion and self-neglect. That's one of the first things we learned here at the Rosalynn Carter Institute. You have to take care of yourself, because if you don't, the help that you provide is diminished. You're not able to do what you need to do. So everybody needs to take care of themselves. When one is busy taking care of another, he or she may forget about taking care of his or her own needs. Our military caregivers are facing challenges too. They're living and adjusting to a new normal and dealing with post-traumatic stress, PTSD, and TBI, traumatic brain injury. Caregivers need opportunities to learn new skills, gain empowerment to develop new capacities to successfully manage the challenges they face. And that's what Rosalynn Carter Institute is doing through our REACH program, Care Consultation, and Operation Family Caregiver programs. Training caregivers, we call it coaching, in the skills they need to be effective and supportive caregivers. All of these programs are making a difference in the lives of caregivers and their families. And we are all going to hear more stories about this today. Who recognize the need to support these unsung heroes. I look forward to what we will learn and our conversation throughout the day. I want to take a moment now to thank Johnson & Johnson, who has recognized the importance of this work from the beginning and has supported our work generously for almost 14 years. There is no way we could do what we do without the support of Johnson & Johnson. It's just deeply, deeply grateful. I would like to recognize Bonnie Petrauskas as the Executive Director of the Worldwide Corporate Contributions at Johnson & Johnson. In this role, she leads strategic philanthropic efforts focused on empowering communities to achieve long-term differences in human health. And prior to her current role, she was responsible for leading efforts in the adoption of cross-sector community-based approaches to develop and implement solutions in New Jersey, where the U.S. Home Office of J&J is located. She does this through projects that prevent chronic diseases in vulnerable populations, care for those living with mental illnesses, and most importantly, supporting caregivers. We are deeply grateful to you. and she's going to be speaking to us today. Right, not today. At this time, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Candy Faree is founder and president of 360 Strategic Group and part of our Johnson & Johnson team of support. Candy has over 2 decades of executive leadership in the philanthropic and nonprofit sectors and has been valuable to RCI as a strategic visionary. On a personal note, Candy deeply understands the needs of caregivers through her work in the early days of HIV/AIDS with families impacted by dementia, and most recently, caring for her father following a severe spinal injury. I was a caregiver for my grandfather. I helped my mother. My father died when I was 13. My grandfather, her mother died the next year, and my grandfather came to live with us. And so I know caregiving experience myself. And I worked on mental health. I've worked on mental health issues for almost 45 years. And when we had, and when I had a chance to work on caregiving, it was so good for me because I had had all of that experience and it fit in perfectly with my mental health work. And I became interested, was able to develop the Rosalynn Carter Institute because when I came home from the White House, the university had, it was a college back then, had small endowment for mental health program, and they wanted me to do something with them. But by the time I thought I could, I already had a good mental health program at the Carter Center in Atlanta. I had a governor's commission, a president's commission, and now I have a really good program there. And so I had seen people, families of those living with mental illnesses who had struggled so and had nowhere to turn or didn't know where to go when they had a problem and when somebody in the family developed a mental illness. And so we first were going to work with those caring for people with mental illnesses, but it spread even before our first meeting, I think, when we saw that other people in the community were having problems caring for feeble, aging family members, physical problems, and so forth. And so that is how I became interested. But back to Candy. Candy holds a master's degree in community psychology from Pennsylvania State University and a bachelor's degree in family studies and gerontology from Messiah College, where she serves as adjunct faculty. She's also a graduate of the Johnson & Johnson UCLA Healthcare Executive Program. Please join me in welcoming Candy Faree to the podium.
Thank you, Mrs. Carter. I was noticing this morning that my colleague Bonnie Petrauskas and Mrs. Carter have matching blue jackets. Apparently, I didn't get the memo. Well, first of all, thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm here and thankful to my colleague Bonnie for giving me the opportunity. Over the past 3 years, I've had the chance to work as a consultant with Johnson & Johnson, including on their work in caregiving. And to build on the work that our colleague Rick Martinez had started with Mrs. Carter so many years ago. And as things change at Johnson & Johnson, Bonnie came into this role, as Mrs. Carter said, she used to manage the New Jersey portfolio. Bonnie is now the director, and you will all be in tremendously good hands moving forward. But she was gracious enough to allow me to come and to see all of you, because I feel like in many ways, I know many of you, but not all of you. At Johnson & Johnson, there's 120,000 employees, one of the largest healthcare companies in the world. So we come very humbly to say thank you to you. Mrs. Carter is always gracious about the support of Johnson & Johnson, but at the end of the day, all the corporate philanthropy, all the dollars in the world will never make a difference unless they're in the hands of the right people. and you are those people. For the RCI staff, Leisa and Laura, could you just stand for a second? Thank you. Thank you. They have been tireless in helping us to learn and understand, and better learn and better understand the challenges and the opportunities that are out there. The Dole Fellows are here with us. I think most of them are over here. We're tremendously grateful for the time you spent with us yesterday, helping us to learn about how can we think differently about this work so we can reach more families. Are there ways to use technology? And there are a number of folks in the audience, too, who are from the board of the RCI. I don't know, is Miss Betty here? I know she's been around. And I think Alice is in the back. I see her coming in. Thank you as a board member of RCI from Johnson & Johnson, and Kathy Cade is here. You all have been tremendous supporters to us in this work. But this is personal for many of us. As Mrs. Carter said, for me, the reality of caregiving became very real when my father had a spinal cord injury and went from one day being completely busy and active and doing things around the house and working to being in a power chair, where the doctors told us only 2% of people with his injury, he had a T8 spinal fracture, complete fracture, would possibly get feeling back. And he was determined that he was going to walk again. And he did. Not long distances, a little bit with a walker, but that determination is the same determination that I have seen from you as military caregivers and service members. And for those of you who are service members, thank you from Johnson & Johnson for your service to our country. It is not long, yes. Thank you. Thank you. For those of you who don't know, and Bonnie may speak more to this this evening, but our CEO at Johnson & Johnson is Alex Gorski, and he's a West Point grad. Has had a military career before he came into the private sector. And at J&J, we get it. We get that public-private partnerships are critical. Critical to employment of veterans, critical to supporting families and ensuring that families have the ability to be good caregivers in their work without risk of losing their jobs. OFC is also special to me because a bunch of years ago, and I don't even know if I've shared this with you, Leisa, I was in a very severe car accident. For all intents and purposes, I should not have survived it. Head-on collision, total destruction of the car, body boarded out, and walked out of the hospital that night. And I never understood what PTSD was until then. It's not something I talk about. It was a very dark time for me and my family. But learning to live through that trauma and being willing to reach out for help. I was the CEO of a very successful nonprofit organization in Washington at the time, and I was non-functional. I could not figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. And over a course of a year, that changed, and I am tremendously grateful. And you never know what those experiences are about, so for many, many years, I was like, why did that happen? You know, why me? Well, and yet I was grateful for my life. And so that sort of tug and pull of what that means to walk that journey every day became very real. And I think it might not be the only lesson I have to learn from that, but I get it. What that means. And I am tremendously grateful for you as caregivers for all that you do every day. And Johnson & Johnson, is a company that has been, and I believe will be, an enduring partner with the Rosalynn Carter Institute. We are also really excited to welcome Bristol Myers Squibb as another partner to supporting the work at RCI. And I think the interesting thing too about Johnson & Johnson and corporate philanthropy is sometimes companies compete against each other, right? We're both healthcare companies, why would we want them? And at Johnson & Johnson, it's always about how can we add more? Who can we bring to the party? How can we help RCI broker those relationships? It's not a competition with us. There is plenty of work to be done, and there is enough room in the family for all donors, local, national, foundations, individuals. And so we are thrilled that folks have come. I think they're Blue Star Family sites that are here along with the new OFC sites. So where are our Blue Star Family sites? Thank you. We are thrilled that you're here. I have not had a chance to meet many of you who are new sites, and Bonnie hasn't met anyone yet really from the sites. So please, over the course of the rest of the day and tonight, make yourselves known to us. We want to support you. We know that your success is our success. We're not confused about that. And I also wanted to just close by saying that some of you, especially those of you who worked in the Alzheimer's space, know Rick Martinez. Any of you remember Rick? Yeah, a bunch of you know Rick. Rick was the visionary at J&J to start this work on first mental health and then in caregiving, and then to launch the first site of OFC. And Rick has a message. So about a year ago, almost to the day, Rick was diagnosed with cancer. And when I was heading down here, I was literally on the plane. I said, Rick, I'm on the plane. I'm heading down to the RCI for the summit. Is there anything you would like me to share? And this is what he said. So that's why I carried my cell phone up here. Dear friends, last year I became a patient. As a result of disfiguring surgery, I have joined the ranks of the disabled. I find myself confronting demands of personal caregiving. What was once theoretical or academic has become a way of life. I learned to deal with frequent doctor's appointments, physical pain, and navigating streets in a wheelchair. I am thankful for my family and friends who have made such an important impact in my life. I stand in spirit with the Rosalynn Carter Institute. Your work has always been important to me, and now it's personal. I'm thankful that J&J continues to support you, and I'm happy that Candy and Bonnie are there because they understand. Best wishes to you. Have a great meeting, and I hope to see you again soon. You know many things about Mrs. Carter, all of the amazing stuff she's done around the world and in support of your work. Some of the things, though, that I think are most special about who she is as a human being are things like, 2 years ago, I was sitting next to her at the gala, and I said, Mrs. Carter, what do you do when you're not out saving the world? She said, fly fishing and butterfly gardens. I love butterfly gardens. I do a lot of that with my granddaughter, and we talked about gardening, which I love too, and a few weeks later, in the mail, came a packet of seeds and a note that said, plant these seeds so you too can have a butterfly garden. When Rick was diagnosed, we sent a lot of notices out to folks that he had worked with. And I said, what do you want us to say to Mrs. Carter? And he said, I will communicate with Mrs. Carter. And she communicated back. And that is so tremendously just moving to all of us at Johnson & Johnson and has been so important to Rick. And so I want to say thank you. That's who our leader is. That's the caliber of person, someone who is beyond humanitarian, but who gets it and is a partner for us every day in this work. Thank you, Mrs. Carter, on behalf of Johnson & Johnson.
Thank you, Candy, and thank you to Johnson & Johnson, our sponsor for this summit. And thank you, Rick, and we do reach out to him, and we're very appreciative of all of his contributions to the work that we do here. Johnson & Johnson is very special to the Rosalynn Carter Institute because of their very long-term and unwavering support. I cannot overstate our appreciation for their investment in the caregiving space. They had great foresight. They shared our vision for improving the quality of life for those unsung heroes who care for their family members, helping not only the caregiver, but in turn helping the one that they are caring for. Along with our recognition of Johnson & Johnson, I also want to acknowledge others, the United States Administration for Community Living, as Candy mentioned, the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, the Georgia Department of Aging, and even some anonymous donors we've had. The translational research that's been funded by these funders established RCI REACH, and that REACH is an acronym for Resources Enhancing Alzheimer's Caregiver Health, BRI, which is Benjamin Rose Institute Care Consultation, Operation Family Caregiver, and Dealing with Dementia Training. They are in many states across our nation now to provide support to families providing care. At this time, there are 23 established sites of RCI REACH, 21 sites of the Care Consultation, and there are 7 sites of Operation Family Caregiver, and more to come. And we have 34 training sites of dealing with dementia. We are excited today, though, to recognize 5 new sites and leaders of Operation Family Caregiver. They are all moving ahead to offer this valuable program in these following states. And I'd like you to stand so people can connect with you later. In Virginia, we have Christy Jensen, the Director of Health Services Research at Riverside Center for Excellence in Aging and Lifelong Health, and Brandy Jacotis, who's the Director of the Virginia Wounded Warrior Program. Thank you. In North Carolina, we have Jacqueline Cavada, the Vice President of Program Development, Easter Seals UCP, and Brenda Monforti, OFC Caregiver Coach at Easter Seals. In Los Angeles, in California, we have Lori Van Tilburg, the Executive Director, and Robert Velasquez, the Director of Business Operations at Southern Caregiver Resource Center. And in Washington, D.C. and San Antonio, Texas, we have Laura Roberts and Callie Barr of Blue Star Families. I am proud that these organizations recognize the value of Operation Family Caregiver, and they are devoting time and energy to implement this valuable program. All caregivers, military and others, deserve to have programs that have proven to be effective. In other words, programs that measure outcomes, that measure impact. There's someone else I'd like to recognize in the audience. He's our interim president of Georgia Southwestern, Dr. Charles Patterson. If you would stand, and any of our RCI board members. They are wonderful and support us at the Institute, and they help us move forward.